AITA for not cooking a second meal for my younger siblings after they refused to eat what I made. I'm a 16-year-old girl and the oldest of 3 siblings. My parents had to leave for a quick business trip to a neighboring state about a week ago. It was supposed to be a one-night trip, but thanks to this absolutely awful weather, serious storms, road closures, and even power outages in some areas, they've been stuck for way longer than expected. To be fair, they've been doing their best to check in with us daily, but let's be real, a phone call every now and then isn't the same as having them home. Meanwhile, I've essentially been handed the role of acting parent to my 2 younger siblings, Mia 9 female and Max 7 male. Don't get me wrong, I love my siblings to bits. They're funny, smart, and can be really sweet when they want to be. But taking care of them full-time, managing chores, keeping the house from becoming a disaster zone, and trying to stay on top of my schoolwork? It's a lot. Like, I've barely had a moment to breathe, let alone relax. Honestly, I've been running on pure adrenaline and caffeine, okay, and maybe a bit of spite, just to get through each day. By the time we got to day 3 of our parents left, I was completely wiped out. The kind of tired that no amount of coffee or power naps could fix. But hey, I was still standing. I'd somehow managed to keep the house from descending into complete chaos, a minor miracle, considering the energy levels of a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. The dishes weren't overflowing out of the sink, the laundry was mostly caught up, and I'd even made the kids pick up their toys a few times, which honestly felt like winning the lottery. Mia and Max weren't fighting all the time, just intermittently, which I counted as progress. Still, there was one battle I seemed doomed to lose every single day, feeding them. Oh my God. Feeding these kids was a waking nightmare. I mean, they weren't just picky, they were Olympic-level picky. If refusing perfectly good food were a sport, they'd both have gold medals hanging around their necks. Their ideal menu consisted of maybe 3 items, chicken nuggets, mac and cheese, but only the boxed kind, not the fancy, homemade stuff, and those obnoxiously sugary cereal bars that are more candy than breakfast. Anything outside of that sacred trifecta? Forget it. I tried offering healthier options, fruit, carrot sticks, even just plain old peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But the reaction was always the same, dramatic groaning, exaggerated gagging noises, and complaints so over the top you'd think I was trying to poison them. It was exhausting. Then came the infamous lasagna incident. That day, I was running on a weird combination of guilt and misguided ambition. See, the first couple of nights after our parents left, I had been pretty much phoning it in when it came to dinner. Frozen pizzas one night, instant noodles the next, quick, easy, no complaints, for the most part. But by day 3, the guilt started creeping in. I mean, I'm 16, practically an adult, right? I felt like I should be doing better, like I should be stepping up. So, I decided to go all out and make a real, proper meal. Something homemade, something that would make me feel like a responsible, mature, stand-in mom. A meal that said, I've got this. After some brainstorming, and honestly, just craving it myself, I landed on spinach and cheese lasagna. Okay, sure, it wasn't exactly kid food, but I figured it couldn't be that far off the mark. They like pasta. They like cheese. Spinach is just green cheese, right? I mean, how bad could this really go? Feeling oddly optimistic, I dove headfirst into the kitchen. Now, let me tell you, making lasagna from scratch is no joke. It's not just throwing some pasta in a pot and calling it a day, it's a whole process. First, I had to chop the spinach, sauté it, and make sure it didn't end up a soggy mess. Then came the ricotta mixture, the marinara sauce, store-bought because let's be real, I'm not that ambitious, and layering everything just right. It was a balancing act, and I was doing it all while keeping one eye on Mia and Max, who were running laps around the house and occasionally threatening to break something. At one point, I had to stop mid-layering to stop Max from trying to climb onto the kitchen counter, to see what happens when you drop a cup of water from up high. Yeah, fun times. By the time I pulled the lasagna out of the oven, I was so proud of myself. It looked incredible, like, picture perfect. The cheese was golden and bubbling, the edges were crispy in just the right way, and the smell. Oh my God, the smell. It filled the whole house with this warm, savory aroma that made me feel like I was starring in my own cooking show. For a moment, I actually felt a little smug. Like, wow, look at me. I'm crushing this whole temporary mom thing. Feeling like a domestic goddess, I proudly called the kids to the table. I had placed the lasagna slices on plates with the kind of care you'd expect from someone preparing a meal for royalty. I even arranged their drinks neatly beside their plates, hoping the effort would make the meal feel special. As they shuffled over, still glued to whatever cartoon was blasting from the living room, I could feel a little bubble of pride swelling in my chest. This was it. I had worked my butt off all day, and now I'd get to see them enjoy the fruits of my labor. Or so I thought. Mia sat down first, looking at her plate with an expression that could only be described as suspicion. She picked up her fork like it was some kind of foreign object, hesitated, then poked at the lasagna like it might suddenly spring to life and attack her. After a few tentative jabs, she scrunched up her face and said, "What's this green stuff?" in a tone that made it sound like I had served her a plate of poison ivy. I tried to explain it was just spinach, as if spinach wasn't one of the most universally hated vegetables by kids everywhere. But the look she gave me was pure betrayal. You'd think I had personally conspired to ruin her evening. Then there was Max. Oh, Max. He didn't even give it the courtesy of a poke. One glance at the lasagna was all it took for him to declare, "This is gross. I want nuggets." Nuggets. Of course, nuggets. It's like his brain was hardwired to default to nuggets any time a meal didn't involve something fried or shaped like a dinosaur. I tried reasoning with him, reminding him that we didn't have any nuggets or anything remotely similar. But no, that didn't matter to him. The fact that nuggets didn't exist in the house was irrelevant, he wanted them anyway, and that was final. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "This is dinner," I told them, as calmly as I could. "If you don't want it, that's fine, but I'm not making anything else." I was hoping for some sort of acknowledgement, a reluctant, "Okay, maybe I'll give it a try," or even a grudging nibble. But nope. They both flat out refused, turning their noses up like I'd served them something straight out of a science experiment. Mia dramatically pushed her plate away, as though the lasagna might contaminate her if it got any closer, while Max just got up and wandered back to the couch without another word. I was left standing there, staring at the table, feeling a mix of frustration, exhaustion, and disbelief. Still, I held my ground. Fine, I thought. They'll get hungry eventually. No one voluntarily starves when there's food available, right? I figured they'd come back when their stomachs started grumbling and sneak a bite when they thought I wasn't looking. After all, I'd put hours into this meal, there was no way they'd just ignore it completely. At least, that's what I told myself. But guess what? They didn't eat. Not then, not an hour later, not even when I reheated the lasagna later that evening, thinking the warm, gooey cheese and savory smell might entice them. Nothing. Nada. They just stayed camped out in front of the TV, happily munching on whatever snacks they had managed to scrounge up from the pantry while I wasn't paying attention. It was as if the lasagna didn't exist. By the time I went to check on them again, I was completely drained, physically, mentally, emotionally. I had this towering pile of homework waiting for me, and the last thing I wanted to do was get into another argument about dinner. I just didn't have it in me. Eventually, I gave up. I left the untouched lasagna on the table, covered it with foil, and trudged upstairs to my room. I hoped, maybe naively, that they'd get hungry during the night and quietly eat it without making a fuss. But the next few days weren't much better. I kept trying to make meals that were at least semi-nutritious, and they kept turning their noses up at everything. Grilled cheese. Too burnt, it wasn't. Scrambled eggs. Too slimy. Even plain buttered noodles were apparently offensive to their delicate palates. I was losing my mind. They weren't starving, they were snacking on chips and crackers here and there, but it felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't win. And with school, homework, and the never-ending list of chores, I was barely holding it together. Update 1. A few days later, my mom finally managed to call and check in. I wasn't surprised it had taken her so long. Between the insane weather and everything they were dealing with on their end, I assumed her focus was elsewhere. But when I heard her voice, there was this strange mix of relief and apprehension that hit me all at once. Relief, because I felt like I could finally unload the sheer chaos I'd been juggling. Apprehension, because I knew that no matter how much I tried to explain, there was a good chance she wouldn't fully get it. And, well, I wasn't wrong. The first few minutes of the call were perfectly fine, pleasant, even. We stuck to surface-level stuff, and I gave her the usual updates. The house was still standing, no one had managed to hurt themselves, or each other, and I was doing my best to keep up with schoolwork in the midst of all the chaos. It was the kind of conversation you'd expect in a situation like this, a brief check-in to confirm that everything hadn't completely fallen apart in her absence. For a moment, I even felt a small sense of relief, like maybe I'd finally get some acknowledgement for holding it together as well as I had. But then I mentioned the lasagna incident, and everything changed. It wasn't even something I'd planned to bring up, it just slipped out as part of the broader rundown of how things had been going. To me, it was just one of the many minor disasters I'd had to deal with over the past few days, an incident I was already chalking up as a learning experience and moving on from. But as soon as I started explaining how I'd spent hours making dinner only for the kids to refuse it, I could feel a shift in her tone. Even over the phone, it was unmistakable. Suddenly, the conversation stopped feeling like a casual check-in and started to feel more like a parent-teacher conference where I was the student being reprimanded. It was like I'd triggered some deep, primal parenting instinct in her, and now I was no longer her daughter but a stand-in caregiver who had somehow failed one of the most fundamental responsibilities of looking after children, feeding them. She wasted no time letting me know exactly what she thought about the situation. She started telling me how important it was to make sure the kids were eating, how children don't always understand what's good for them, and how it was ultimately my job to ensure they were taken care of no matter what. It wasn't exactly yelling, but her voice had that sharp, disappointed edge that cuts deeper than outright anger ever could. I sat there listening, holding the phone tightly against my ear, trying to stay calm while this wave of frustration started building inside me. What did she think I'd been doing for the past few days? Did she really believe I'd just been sitting around, ignoring the kids while they starved? I had been running myself ragged trying to keep everything under control, cooking, cleaning, managing their constant bickering, and making sure the house didn't turn into a complete disaster zone. Feeding them had been at the top of my priority list, but how was I supposed to succeed when they refused to eat anything I put in front of them? Did she expect me to magically conjure chicken nuggets out of thin air or whip up a completely new meal every time they turned their noses up at something? It wasn't like I had endless resources, or endless energy, for that matter. I tried to explain all of this as calmly as I could. I told her about the effort I'd put into the lasagna, how I'd encouraged the kids to at least try it, and how they'd flat out refused. I explained how I'd given them other options, snacks, simple meals, whatever I could manage, but they just weren't interested unless it was something from their extremely narrow list of acceptable foods. I told her that I was already overwhelmed trying to balance everything else, schoolwork, chores, keeping the peace between Mia and Max, and that I just didn't have it in me to play the role of a short-order cook. I thought she might understand, or at least acknowledge the effort I'd been putting in, but she wasn't having it. She kept repeating the same thing, they're kids. You can't just let them go hungry. It was like a mantra, and the more she said it, the more I felt this crushing weight settle in my chest. That's when it really hit me, she didn't understand. Not fully, anyway. From her perspective, it probably sounded like I'd just thrown up my hands in frustration and walked away the moment they didn't like what I made. She didn't see the hours I'd spent preparing that lasagna, the careful layering, the way I'd hovered over the oven to make sure it didn't burn. She didn't see the disappointment I felt when they refused to even give it a chance, or the frustration of watching them snack on chips and crackers instead of eating the food I'd worked so hard to prepare. She didn't see the mental tug-of-war I'd gone through, wondering if I was being too harsh by standing my ground or too lenient by letting them get away with their pickiness. She didn't see the moments I spent cleaning up after them, trying to reason with them, or squeezing in homework during the brief moments of calm. And she definitely didn't see the exhaustion I felt after days of trying to juggle everything on my own, knowing that no matter what I did, it wouldn't be enough to satisfy everyone. To make things worse, apparently, Mia and Max had been giving her their version of events during previous check-ins. According to them, they hadn't eaten anything in days, which was a blatant exaggeration. They'd definitely been eating, just not full meals, because they refused everything I made. But to my mom, hearing that from them probably set off all kinds of alarm bells. She started lecturing me about how stubborn I was being, how I needed to find a way to make it work, and how I should have just made them something simple that they liked. And honestly, that's when I started to feel the guilt creeping in. Because the thing is, she wasn't entirely wrong. They're kids, they don't have the same understanding of hunger or nutrition or effort that I do. To them, food is just food, and if it doesn't taste exactly how they want it to, they'll go without. But hearing her say it, I couldn't help but feel like I'd failed. Like I should have tried harder, been more patient, done something differently. Maybe I should have caved and made them mac and cheese. Maybe I should have let them eat chips and crackers and called it a day. Maybe I should have found a way to make mealtime less of a battle. But at the same time, I felt this overwhelming sense of frustration. It wasn't like I was sitting around doing nothing. I'd been trying, really trying, to keep everything together, to make sure they were okay, to fill in for our parents as best as I could. And yeah, maybe I didn't handle every situation perfectly, but who could? I'm 16. I'm not a parent. I didn't sign up to be their personal chef, maid, and babysitter all at once. I've been doing my best, but my best doesn't include bending over backward to make 3 different meals every night just because they're picky. And it definitely doesn't include ignoring my own schoolwork and responsibilities to cater to every whim they have. By the time the call ended, I felt completely drained. My mom wasn't outright angry, she wasn't yelling or anything, but her disappointment was clear, and it stung. It felt like no matter how much effort I put in, it wasn't enough. I knew she was just worried about the kids, but it still hurt to feel like I was being blamed for a situation I had no control over. I sat there for a while after hanging up, staring at the wall and wondering if I was really such a terrible sister. Was I selfish for drawing the line? Was I failing them by not catering to their picky eating habits? Was I expecting too much from them, or from myself? I went through the motions, helped Mia with her homework, played a quick game with Max, cleaned up around the house, but the guilt lingered. It clung to me like a second skin, making every little task feel heavier than it should have. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow let everyone down. I was trying my best, but maybe my best just wasn't good enough. And that's where I'm at now. I'm still exhausted, still trying to keep everything together, still second-guessing myself every step of the way. I know they're just kids, and I know it's my job to take care of them while my parents are stuck, but I honestly feel like I've done my part. I'm not a professional chef, I'm not a full-time babysitter, and I'm definitely not perfect. I'm just a 16-year-old trying to survive in a situation I wasn't prepared for. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for drawing the line? Update 2. When my parents finally came home a few days later, I was expecting relief, like this huge weight would finally be lifted off my shoulders, and I could stop feeling like a stand-in mom and go back to just being a teenager. But if I'm being honest, that's not what happened at all. Instead, what followed left me feeling more frustrated and more underappreciated than I had in the entire time they were gone. They arrived late in the afternoon, looking tired and frazzled from their unexpectedly long trip. The weather had clearly taken a toll on them too, and they came in with all the usual chaos of unpacking bags, shedding wet coats, and complaining about the drive. I was trying to stay out of the way, partially because I didn't want to be caught in the whirlwind of their re-entry, and partially because I wasn't sure how my mom was feeling after our phone call a few days earlier. I was still carrying the weight of that conversation and had no idea what to expect now that they were finally home. Once they had settled in and caught their breath, my mom asked me how things had gone. I gave her a quick rundown, trying to focus on the positives, how the house was still in one piece, how I'd managed to keep up with my schoolwork, how the kids were alive and well and hadn't burned anything down. I didn't bring up the lasagna incident again, mostly because I didn't want to rehash it, but I did mention that feeding Mia and Max had been a challenge. I thought that would be enough, that maybe she'd finally recognize how hard I'd been working and acknowledge the effort I'd put in. Instead, she gave me this look, this disappointed, "You could have done better" look that made me want to crawl under the nearest table. Then came the talk. My mom started by telling me how grateful she was that I had stepped up while they were gone, which, for a split second, made me think this was going to be a supportive, understanding conversation. But it quickly took a turn. She told me that as the oldest sibling, it was my responsibility to take care of Mia and Max when they weren't around. Not just because they needed someone to watch over them, but because, as the oldest, it was my duty to step up for my siblings, no matter how hard it might feel at times. She said it didn't matter whether I wanted to do it or not, it was simply part of being the older sibling, and that was that. I was floored. I mean, I understood the general idea. I've always known that being the oldest comes with a certain level of responsibility. But the way she framed it, it felt less like I was part of a family and more like I was an unpaid employee who had no say in the matter. There was no acknowledgement of how hard I'd been trying or how overwhelmed I'd been. No recognition of the fact that I was 16, still figuring out my own life, and had suddenly been thrust into a role I wasn't prepared for. It was just this blanket statement that as the oldest, it was my job, end of discussion. She went on to explain how important it was to set a good example for Mia and Max, how they look up to me and learn from what I do. She said I needed to be more responsible, more patient, and more willing to adapt to their needs, even when it felt unfair. I stood there, stunned, as she essentially told me that none of my feelings, my exhaustion, my frustration, my attempts to set boundaries, mattered in the grand scheme of things. The only thing that mattered was that I was the older sister, and that came with obligations I couldn't opt out of. It was like everything I'd been feeling over the past week, all the stress and guilt and resentment, had just been validated, but not in a good way. Instead of feeling seen or understood, I felt like all my worst fears had been confirmed, that no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough, because I was expected to be perfect. I was expected to juggle school, chores, babysitting, and everything else without complaint, simply because of the order in which I was born. It didn't matter if I was struggling, or if I was doing my best, I would always be judged for the ways I fell short. After that little lecture, my mom went straight to the kitchen to make dinner. She didn't even ask what the kids wanted or if they were hungry, she just started cooking like it was the most natural thing in the world. And honestly, it was like watching an entirely different universe unfold. Mia and Max, who had spent the last few days refusing to eat just about everything I put in front of them, suddenly turned into obedient little angels. They sat at the table without complaint, waited patiently for her to finish, and when she served them, they didn't make a single face or protest. They just ate. No dramatic gagging noises, no declarations of, "This is gross," no whining about nuggets or snacks. They just ate. I couldn't believe it. I stood there in the doorway, watching in disbelief as my mom effortlessly succeeded at the very thing that had felt impossible for me. The lasagna, the scrambled eggs, the buttered noodles, all of it had been a battle for me, and yet here she was, serving up something just as complicated, without even breaking a sweat. And the kids didn't just eat, they thanked her. They thanked her. It was like the Twilight Zone. It felt like a slap in the face. I had spent days bending over backward, trying to feed them, reason with them, and keep them happy, and all I got for my trouble was complaints and refusals. But the moment my mom stepped in, it was like none of that ever happened. They just fell in line, like everything I'd gone through was some kind of fluke. It wasn't even that the food she made was particularly special, it was something simple, something I easily could have made myself. The difference was her. They listened to her in a way they clearly didn't listen to me, and that realization stung more than I wanted to admit. I wanted to scream, to cry, to defend myself, to do something, but instead, I just stood there, silent, as my mom carried on like nothing had happened. Because in her mind, nothing had. She had come home, taken control, and fixed the problem, and that was the end of it.